Hello, I'm Katie Wilson. Welcome to A News. Here's what's shaping the headlines today. Russia and Ukraine exchange 157 troops each following US-brokered Abu Dhabi talks. Israel strikes in Gaza kill more than 20 Palestinians, including women and children. Marco Rubio hosts a critical minerals meeting as the US moves to counter China's dominance. Thanks for joining us. Russia and Ukraine have carried out a prisoner swap of 157 soldiers each after US-mediated talks in Abu Dhabi. The US described the exchange as a meaningful step forward in ongoing diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the conflict.
Russia and Ukraine conducted a mutual exchange of 157 prisoners of war each on Thursday, concluding 2 days of US-mediated talks in Abu Dhabi. The total swap of 314 detainees was confirmed by US envoy Steve Witkoff, following the second round of trilateral talks in the Emirati capital. Witkoff noted that such measures reflect the concrete outcomes of sustained diplomatic engagement and contribute to advancing efforts to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. US President Donald Trump sent Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to help bring the sides closer to an agreement. Despite the two sides remaining far apart on key points after several rounds of talks with US officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says they're committed to finding a compromise.
The good news is that for the first time in a very long time, we have technical military teams from both Ukraine and Russia meeting in a forum that we'll also be involved with, in our experts. I don't want to say talks alone or progress, but it's good that there's engagement going on. Our goal is to remain committed. We've committed a year to this. We think we've made real progress.
The head of the Ukrainian delegation, Rustem Umerov, said on social media that Kyiv's goal was to achieve a just and lasting peace. He described the negotiations as substantive and productive, adding that the talks focused on concrete steps and practical solutions. In Moscow, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia would not issue any statement on the outcome of the trilateral talks. He said Russia's position on Ukraine was already clear and well understood by both Kyiv and US negotiators. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky followed the talks closely from Kyiv. He posted photos of Ukraine's negotiating team ahead of the new round of meetings. In his nightly address, Zelensky said the talks must lead to real peace.
Partners must be ready to ensure this with real guarantees, security guarantees, and real pressure on the aggressor. It must also be felt now. People in Ukraine must feel that the situation is genuinely moving toward peace and the end of the war, not toward Russia using everything to its advantage and continuing attack.
A previous meeting of the Trilateral Working Group on Security Issues was held in Abu Dhabi in January. It was the first trilateral engagement since the conflict began in February 2022.
The New START nuclear treaty between the United States and Russia is set to expire today unless the two sides reach a last-minute agreement, a move that would leave the world's two largest nuclear powers without formal limits on their strategic arsenals for the first time in decades.
The world's last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia is about to expire, raising fresh concerns over strategic stability and a renewed arms race. The New START treaty is set to lapse on February 5th unless Washington and Moscow reach a last-minute agreement. If it ends, the two countries would be left for the first time in more than 50 years without any binding limits on their strategic nuclear weapons. Signed in 2010, New START caps the number of deployed nuclear warheads, missiles and bombers, and allows inspections and data exchanges aimed at building transparency and trust.
With the loss of New START now, and the loss or in the absence of the negotiation for some kind of replacement for New START, we continue this loss of communication between the two sides on these critical strategic issues. Having said that, I mean, Russia had suspended its participation in New START back in 2023, so we've not had these data exchanges for quite some time.
That loss of communication matters. Without inspections or verified data, both sides are left relying on assumptions, increasing mistrust and the risk of miscalculation. The security environment has also changed. Russia has tested new nuclear-capable systems beyond the treaty's scope, while the United States is increasingly focused on China's expanding nuclear arsenal.
The New START is one of the most important instruments of arms control. Its purpose is to ensure strategic stability and avoid an uncontrolled arms race and escalation risks.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin says a potential off-ramp was left unanswered. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia proposed continuing to comply with New START for 1 year after its expiration. Russian President Vladimir Putin has backed extending existing limits to buy time for further talks. US President Donald Trump has yet to formally respond, saying the treaty should be replaced with a better one, even if it expires. Some US politicians argue Washington should expand its arsenal to counter China, while Beijing rejects joining talks as long as US and Russian arsenals remain far larger than its own. If New START expires without a replacement, there will be no shared rules, no inspections and no formal limits.
Well, the Kremlin said on Thursday that Russia would maintain a responsible approach to strategic nuclear stability as its last arms control treaty with the United States expires. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stated that the New START agreement, which sets limits on missiles, launchers and strategic warheads, would cease to be enforced by the end of the day. He added that Moscow views the treaty's expiry negatively and noted that Russia had proposed a 1-year extension to which the United States did not formally respond. French President Emmanuel Macron hosted European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa in Paris for talks. The discussions at the Élysée Palace focused on laying the groundwork for an informal leaders' summit scheduled for later this month, with an emphasis on boosting EU competitiveness. The agenda also included security and defence issues, continued support for Ukraine, and broader challenges surrounding European sovereignty. Over to the Middle East now, and Israeli attacks across the Gaza Strip have killed at least 24 Palestinians. That's according to local health officials. Authorities say that several areas were hit, including Gaza City and Khan Yunis, raising fresh concerns about the stability of the ceasefire.
Israeli attacks across Gaza have killed at least 24 Palestinians since dawn, according to local health officials. Among the dead are 6 children and several women. Authorities say the strikes hit multiple areas, including Gaza City in the north and Khan Yunis in the south. Health officials say a medic was killed while trying to help wounded people. He died when a second attack hit the same location. In Khan Yunis, explosions also struck tents in Al-Mawasi, an area sheltering displaced families. The Israeli military says the strikes were carried out after Palestinian fighters opened fire on Israeli troops, seriously wounding a reservist. Israel described the incident as a violation of the ceasefire and said one strike targeted a senior militant commander. The violence comes just days after the Rafah border crossing with Egypt partially reopened. However, evacuations of patients were briefly halted, leaving many waiting to cross for medical treatment. Israeli authorities say the crossing remains open, but cite security and coordination issues. Palestinian health officials say dozens of patients were unable to leave Gaza as planned. Hamas has condemned the latest attacks, warning they risk undermining the fragile ceasefire, which has been in place for nearly 4 months.
The United States is launching a push to build a new trade bloc on critical minerals, seeking to reduce dependence on China and reshape how key minerals are sourced and priced worldwide.
The US is rallying allies to form a new trade bloc for critical minerals materials vital to electric vehicles, semiconductors and advanced defence systems. Speaking at a ministerial forum at the US State Department in Washington, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the initiative aims to protect global supply chains from disruption.
We have 55 partners that we're hoping to enter into collaboration with. Many have already signed on, and the goal here is very simple. We all understand that having a reliable global supply chains and critical minerals and processed and finished materials are critical to everything we do. Today it's heavily concentrated in the hands of one country, and that lends itself to, at worst case scenario, being used as a tool of leverage in geopolitics.
The Trump administration previously launched Project Vault, a federally backed strategic reserve of critical minerals, treating access to these materials as a national security priority. US officials say recent export restrictions and market disruptions have underscored the urgency of securing alternative supplies. Critical minerals are essential for modern technology, but most are processed and refined outside the countries where they are mined, creating supply bottlenecks. US officials say that concentration largely benefits China, which dominates global processing capacity for many critical minerals. Washington argues this gives Beijing significant economic leverage and leaves other countries exposed to export controls, price pressure and political risk.
And I think there's a growing global recognition that we need to have supply chains for critical minerals that are reliable and diverse across the world. Some countries have a number of critical minerals that they have available to them in terms of mining, but just haven't been able to do it because a foreign competitor will come in. They'll gut the price, they'll undercut it through state subsidies and unfair practices, and so it becomes economically unviable to be able to explore for critical minerals.
The proposed block would coordinate investment, production and pricing to keep projects economically viable. US officials say the goal is not to cut off trade, but to reduce reliance on a single dominant supplier.
Well, the United States and Argentina have signed a framework agreement to strengthen their cooperation on critical minerals. Argentina's ministry says it's to strengthen and secure supply chains. Last year, the ministry says that mining exports reached more than $6 billion. The deal comes as Washington looks to diversify its sources of critical minerals, reduce reliance on dominant global suppliers, and expand strategic economic partnerships across Latin America. Now, the countdown is on as the Olympic torch reaches Milan and athletes settle into the Olympic Village ahead of the Winter Games opening ceremony. With venues ready and competitors eager to begin, Milano Cortina is poised to welcome the world.
With just hours remaining until the official opening of the 25th Winter Olympic Games in Italy, the Olympic flame is making its way to Milan. Thousands of spectators lined the route to catch a glimpse of the flame as the Olympic torch began the 60th day of its journey. The torch relay is set to pass several Olympic venues across the city before the opening ceremony on Friday. Final touches are still being made across competition venues, while anticipation continues to build ahead of the opening ceremony. In the athletes' village, national delegations have worked to create the best possible environments for their teams, as the majority of competitors have already arrived in Italy.
It's really good. The field of plays are ready, the villages are ready, all the accommodation are ready, the athletes have arrived, majority are already here, and I think they're happy. It's also a nice feeling to be back in Europe, back home. It's close to Austria, you know, quite a couple of hours to come here, a short drive, and the athletes are just happy, enthusiastic, be back in traditional environments.
Several events began 2 days ahead of the formal opening. Finn Hoish, a ski mountaineer, said he has already familiarized himself with local conditions.
We are always eagerly watching the webcams and the track. Large parts of the track are already in place. And yes, of course, we try to deduce from the images what the conditions are like, what the corners are like, what the course is like. But I don't think there will be any surprises. We know the course from last year, from the test event.
Meanwhile, crews have been working around the clock to clear snow from mountain roads, and avalanche control operations were carried out in Cortina d'Ampezzo following heavy snowfall over the past few days. security and logistical preparations intensified with the arrival of US Vice President J.D. Vance in Milan ahead of the opening ceremony. He is leading a US delegation that includes his wife Usha, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the US ambassador to Italy, and several former Olympic champions. The opening ceremony of the Milano Cortina Winter Games is scheduled for Friday night at San Siro Stadium. Nearly 2,900 athletes from more than 90 countries are expected to compete in the Games, which will run through February 22nd.
Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. In Abu Dhabi, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan have been jointly awarded the Zayed Award, recognising efforts to advance peace, encourage cooperation and support regional stability. The move has drawn praise from Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who welcomed the international recognition of initiatives aimed at easing tensions in the South Caucasus. A News' Adam Morrow has more.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has congratulated Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan for receiving this year's Sheikh Zayed Award for Human Fraternity in Abu Dhabi. Erdogan praised recent steps taken by both leaders toward establishing lasting peace in the Caucasus region, describing those efforts as extremely valuable. In a video message, Erdogan reaffirmed Turkey's support for last year's US-brokered peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, saying the deal promised to open a new chapter for the region's future. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev also congratulated Aliyev and Pashinyan on receiving the prestigious award, which was presented at a ceremony held Wednesday in Abu Dhabi. Tokayev said the agreement reached last year marked a turning point in history, showing that even long-standing conflicts can be resolved through dialogue, responsibility, and restraint. He said the deal, brokered last summer by US President Donald Trump, confirmed that reconciliation is not a sign of weakness, but a manifestation of strength. Congratulatory messages were also sent by the leaders of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Lebanon, and Jordan. Launched in 2019, the Sheikh Zayed Award for Human Fraternity recognizes major contributions to the promotion of peace, mutual understanding, solidarity, and coexistence among peoples and cultures. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Talks between the United States and Iran are set to take place in Oman on Friday. US officials say the discussions will go beyond nuclear tensions and include Iran's support for proxy networks across the region. Our correspondent in Tehran brings us more.
The US and Iran have agreed to hold talks this Friday. Both sides confirmed the meeting after disagreement over the agenda and venue. It's now set to take place in Oman. In a post on his X account, Iran's top diplomat Abbas Araghchi confirmed the meeting and also thanked Omani authorities for hosting again the mediating negotiations between Iran and US, which were stalled since Israel-US war against Iran last June. Earlier this week, there were unconfirmed reports that the talks will be held in Turkey with the participation of a number of regional states which are the US allies in the region. The delicate diplomatic effort comes amid heightened tensions as the US builds up forces in the Middle East and regional players seek to avoid a military confrontation that many fear could escalate into a wider war. Differences in recent days over the scope and venue for the talks have raised doubts whether the meeting would take place, leaving open the possibility that US President Donald Trump could carry out his threat to strike Iran. US and Iranian officials said the two sides had agreed to shift the talks' location to Muscat after initially accepting Istanbul. But there was no indication they had found common ground on the agenda. Iran has pushed to restrict the negotiations to discussing its long-running nuclear dispute with Western countries. According to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the US hoped to discuss several concerns beyond the nuclear issue, including discussion on Iran's ballistic missiles and support for proxy networks across the region. A senior Iranian official said, however, that Iran's missile program was off the table. A second senior Iranian official said Tehran would welcome negotiations over the nuclear dispute, but that US insistence on dealing with non-nuclear issues could jeopardize the talks. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
Afghanistan continues to face a deadly legacy of war, with landmines and unexploded devices claiming dozens of lives over the past year. The Afghanistan National Disaster Management Authority says children remain the most affected. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
At least 87 people have been killed and 333 others injured in landmine and unexploded ordnance explosions across Afghanistan over the past year, according to the Afghanistan National Disaster Management Authority. The authority says 193 separate incidents were recorded nationwide, highlighting the continued threat posed by explosive remnants of war. A spokesperson for the authority said that children account for the largest share of casualties, making up more than 2/3 of the victims. Despite ongoing clearance efforts, the danger remains widespread. Officials say that with support from partner organizations, 58 square kilometers of land were cleared of mines during the same period. More than 24,000 mines and unexploded ordnance were detected and neutralized in these operations. However, the authority warns that the challenge is far from over. An estimated 106,000 square kilometers of land across Afghanistan is still believed to be contaminated with mines and unexploded ordnance. The report once again underlines Afghanistan's status as one of the countries worst affected by explosive remnants of war. The United Nations has recently ranked Afghanistan third globally in terms of casualties caused by landmines and unexploded ordnance. Officials are calling for continued international support to accelerate mine clearance efforts and prevent further civilian casualties, particularly among children. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
The Baku military court has delivered verdicts in the trial of Armenian citizens accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity and acts of aggression. 5 defendants were sentenced to life imprisonment, whilst others received long-term prison sentences. Here's more.
Life sentences have been handed down to 5 Armenian nationals, with 2 others receiving 20 years terms. The verdict follows allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity during the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict.
The sentences were delivered at the Baku military court, marking a key moment in the trial of the accused. 5 defendants, Aray Harutyunyan, Levon Manatsakanyan, David Manukyan, David Ishkanyan and David Babayan, were sentenced to life imprisonment following prosecutors' recommendations. 2 others, Arkady Gukasyan and Bako Sahakyan, received 20-year prison terms. In both cases, life imprisonment could not be applied due to age restrictions under Azerbaijani law. Another defendant, Madat Babayan, was sentenced to 19 years in prison. Prosecutors had proposed a 20-year term, and during the proceedings, Babayan reportedly acknowledged his involvement in the Khojaly genocide as part of the Armenian armed forces. The accused faced a wide range of charges under Azerbaijan's criminal code, including planning and carrying out an aggressive war, genocide, violations of international humanitarian law, terrorism, and financing of terrorism. The cases concern alleged responsibility for Armenia's military actions in Azerbaijan carried out through coordinated command structures. A total of 15 Armenian citizens were involved in the trial. Officials say the verdicts mark an important step in addressing alleged crimes and reinforcing accountability for conflict-related actions.
Over to Bishkek now, where Central Asia's drive to attract foreign investment is gaining momentum. Regional leaders and US partners are weighing up new opportunities in resources, finance and connectivity. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamirzana reports.
The B5+1 Business Forum has concluded here in Bishkek, focusing on Central Asia's economic potential and cooperation with the United States. discussions highlighted the region's large domestic market of more than 80 million consumers, its strategic position between Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, as well as investment, access to technology, and integration into global markets, with particular attention to natural resources, including critical minerals.
The Business Forum underscored Central Asia's importance in critical minerals, noting Kazakhstan holds over 30 of the 60 rare earth elements vital to the US. As President Donald Trump plans a strategic mineral reserve, Kyrgyzstan is also gaining attention with over 200 million tons of critical minerals across more than 1,000 deposits.
In the midterm or the near term, it will be hard to compete with China, as they have all the expertise in the critical mineral processing, production, and of course, transforming that commodity into the batteries, the product that is needed for the cars, for the wind turbines, for the battery-based energy storage facilities. But there is a gap in the U.S. presence in Kazakhstan. But at the same time, I'm sure there is a space for every company to get engaged and get their first step into this sector.
The forum also addressed financial sector challenges, noting that Central Asia's engagement with the United States depends on banking stability, risk management, and access to international correspondent banking.
For example, in the banking sector, there needs to be more risk management in the commercial banks. That's one thing. Another thing is that here in Kyrgyzstan and other Central Asian countries, there is a problem with correspondent banking. Countries have been struggling because they lost their corresponding relationships. So they need to make some changes and be able to obtain those correspondent banking relationships once again.
Issues in the banking sector have also brought attention to the broader regulatory environment in Central Asia.
We need to simplify our legislations between Central Asia countries. We need one, understandable rule, how can foreign investor enter to our market? Because every Central Asia, each market, it's not interested for foreign investors. But big Central Asian market, very interested for investors, especially from fintech, e-com, and venture market capital.
U.S. companies were actively engaged at the forum, exploring potential projects in Kyrgyzstan and highlighting Washington's interest in developing regional transport connectivity alongside existing China-led railway initiatives. The forum concluded with the signing of a communique outlining an updated action plan to attract investment and deepen the integration of Central Asian economies into global markets. Fariza Kalimurzina, Bishkek, A-News.
Georgia and the United States have held a rare high-level meeting in Washington, reviving cautious discussion about the future of relations after years of political stagnation. Whilst the Georgian government presents the talks as a signal of renewed dialogue, opposition parties remain sceptical, questioning whether the meeting marks any real shift in US policy towards Georgia.
Deputy Foreign Minister of Georgia, Rashid Arsalia, met with U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Brendan Hanrahan during a working visit to Washington. According to Georgia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the talks focused on bilateral relations, regional developments, and future cooperation. The U.S. side reaffirmed its unconditional support for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Georgian government describes the meeting as a step toward resetting relations. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze said Georgia is ready to turn the page, proposing a renewed strategic partnership built on what he called a clean slate and a concrete roadmap. He emphasized that working-level cooperation between the two foreign ministries continues even as political relations remain, in his word, in waiting mode. However, the meeting was closed to the press and no independent details have been released by the US side, leaving Georgia's official narrative as the primary source of information. Opposition parties remain unconvinced. They argue that the meeting does not signal a policy change in Washington and say that the United States, as a democratic state, has little incentive to deepen ties with a government they accuse of pursuing an anti-democratic and pro-Russian, pro-Chinese and pro-Iranian course. Once considered Washington's closest and most reliable strategic partner in the South Caucasus, Georgia has found itself increasingly sidelined in recent years. Under the Biden administration, the U.S.-Georgia Strategic Partnership Framework was effectively frozen, high-level political dialogue stalled, and Georgia was excluded from several key regional and international initiatives led by Washington. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Uzbekistan is preparing to expand uranium production as part of a broader push to strengthen its mining and energy sectors. Our correspondent in Tashkent brings us more.
Uzbekistan plans to begin developing 4 new uranium deposits in 2026, as authorities move to increase production and expand processing capacity. Last year, the country produced about 7,000 tons of uranium, while identified reserves reached 139,000 tons, highlighting Uzbekistan's growing role in the global nuclear fuel market. New projects are expected at the Aynasay deposit in Jizakh region, as well as western Kizilkok and southern Jogildi in the Vai region, and eastern Agron in Samarkand region. Officials say increased extraction will require expanded infrastructure, including new processing facilities and a stable supply of sulfuric acid used in uranium production. A $150 million project at the Aynasay site is scheduled to launch extraction as early as July, supported by construction of more than 68 kilometers of roads and 110 kilometers of power lines. The plans come as Uzbekistan accelerates cooperation in nuclear energy and seeks to strengthen resource security while supporting long-term industrial growth. Authorities emphasize that improving efficiency and ensuring timely project implementation remain key priorities for the sector's development. Iris Sivilvajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
And finally, art and environmental advocacy have come together in Baku as a new international exhibition turns public sculpture into a call for conservation. The show brings endangered wildlife and shared responsibility into the spotlight at the Heydar Aliyev Center.
Using art as a quiet alarm, a new exhibition in Baku draws attention to wildlife and environmental responsibility. The artworks examine coexistence through storytelling and the contemporary public art.
On Wednesday, a major exhibition opened at the Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku. The show, The Superheroes of Wildlife, features the recurring figures Rabbit Woman and Dog Man. These characters are presented as companions who symbolize acceptance and coexistence. The creators of the exhibition, British and Australian artists Gilly and Mark, are known internationally for public artworks shown in more than 250 cities. Their practice centres on themes of equality, diversity and wildlife conservation.
I think what's really important is that when people see the wildlife sculptures, they touch the wildlife sculptures, they get up close and they form a connection. And when people connect to wildlife, they will care for wildlife and then want to protect wildlife. And we go around the world studying animals, painting animals and drawing animals. And so all the animals you see in our sculpture are from real life.
You know what, we were blown away when we were invited here. It was our dream to come and exhibit in this amazing center, the Heydar Aliyev Center. And we were just telling someone the story yesterday that 10 years ago, we used to do mock-ups of our sculpture in front of this building, except we didn't know that this building was here. And now today, the dream came true and our sculptures are in this amazing building, in this amazing country, which we are absolutely loving, aren't we, Mark?
Yes.
It's just beautiful.
Yes.
In his remarks, the director of the Heydar Aliyev Center, Anar Alakbarov, drew attention to the Caspian Sea seals and said that discussions had been held with the artists on creating a work dedicated to the conservation of this species. The exhibition, which will continue for a year, combines sculpture, painting and immersive elements. It focuses on endangered animals and the need for environmental protection. Interactive works are used to raise awareness and support conservation efforts. The project positions public art as a tool for social engagement and global responsibility.
Now, before we go, let's remind you of our top story for today. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators on Thursday started a second day of US brokered talks in Abu Dhabi. It comes as delegates continue to find a way to end Russia's nearly 4-year war on Ukraine. Officials from Washington and Kyiv say the discussions have been productive so far.
The first day of the second round of talks between Ukraine, Russia and the United States aimed at ending the war in Ukraine were described as productive in Abu Dhabi. US President Donald Trump sent Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to help bring the sides closer to an agreement. Despite the two sides remaining far apart on key points after several rounds of talks with US officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says they're committed to finding a compromise.
The good news is that for the first time in a very long time, we have technical military teams from both Ukraine and Russia meeting in a forum that we'll also be involved with, and our experts. I don't want to say talks alone are progress, but it's good that there's engagement going on. Our goal is to remain committed. We've committed a year to this. We think we've made real progress.
The head of the Ukrainian delegation, Rustem Umerov, said on social media that Kyiv's goal was to achieve a just and lasting peace. He described the negotiations as substantive and productive, adding that the talks focused on concrete steps and practical solutions. In Moscow, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia would not issue any statement on the outcome of the trilateral talks. He said Russia's position on Ukraine was already clear and well understood by both Kyiv and US negotiators. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky followed the talks closely from Kyiv. He posted photos of Ukraine's negotiating team ahead of the new round of meetings. In his nightly address, Zelensky said the talks must lead to real peace.
Partners must be ready to ensure this with real guarantees, security guarantees, and real pressure on the aggressor. It must also be felt now. People in Ukraine must feel that the situation is genuinely moving toward peace and the end of the war, not toward Russia using everything to its advantage and continuing attack.
These talks are due to run for 2 days. A previous meeting of the Trilateral Working Group on Security Issues was held in Abu Dhabi in January. It was the first trilateral engagement since the conflict began in February 2022.
That's your news for this hour. Stay tuned to E! News for more updates, and thank you for watching.